make this accessible to our viewers, so I'm sort of dumbing it down, for the lack of a better word. It seems to me that the state has taken on a very paternalistic view towards Hindus. I don't think the state trusts them to manage their own affairs. They probably suspect the Hindus community. They think that if you give Hindus trusteeship, loosely, if I would use that word, of their own temples, etc., they loot them and clean them up. It obviously doesn't think so of the adherents of any other faith, because it doesn't really manage any other's faith. So I want to understand, is that really what it is, a paternalistic state? Sai Deepak.
With all due respect to Mr. Sanjay Hegde, I think his position is rife with populism and factual inaccuracies, and I'm sorry to say that he's just put on stark display his ignorance of how the law functions as far as this area is concerned. Because SGPC Act certainly exists, but what Mr. Hegde is certainly not aware of is that the SGPC Act specifically refers to a process of election of the members who govern that particular body, as opposed to the process of appointment that happens in Jagannath Puri Mandir or Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanam or any number of institutions. So there is a clear distinction between election as a process and appointment by the state government, which clearly shows that the existence of legislation itself is not sufficient. So that's point number one, where I think Mr. Hegde has got it really wrong. Point number one. Point number two, the assumption that the moment this comes back to the community, it leads to untouchability and, let's say, prohibition on entry of untouchables. I'm sorry to say, is Mr. Hegde not aware of any number of private temples which are in the country today, and are all these private temples practicing untouchability? Is that the argument that he wishes to present? And three, untouchability under Article 17 is a constitutional provision which no legislation can overturn. So merely because we are asking for community to control its temples, it doesn't mean that all sorts of practices will come back. To say that the community is incapable of managing its institutions without observing untouchability is to actually brand the entire Hindu community as a casteist community. I'm so sorry, what kind of an argument is he making? And point number three, how can you even compare Sabarimala, which is a very different issue, from this particular issue? Do you understand the fact that Sabarimala is a very different issue with respect to a very specific religious practice which has got nothing to do with secular aspects of administration? Is that the issue that is being discussed here today? The issue that is being discussed is with respect to secular aspects of administration. Should the state have control over it, or should the community have control over it? Please highlight to me which church has been taken over by the state citing corruption, when there are any number of cases which abound with respect to corruption in church ecosystem. Which mosque has been taken over by the state, so to speak, to show that there is malfeasance in administration, therefore the state must take over. So let us not muddle facts here. If we don't know what we are talking about on a particular subject, it's always better to maintain a dignified silence as opposed to exposing our ignorance on what exactly the law says on these issues. And I don't think he's actually read the HRC Act as far as the Tamil Nadu government is concerned, the TNHRC Act of 1959. There are specific provisions which prevent untouchability from coming back. So nobody is asking for those provisions to be taken away. We are only saying that those aspects of the provisions which give a big brotherly position to the state to preside over all aspects of these institutions must go. And nobody is saying that the state does not have the power to set the house in order in terms of corruption. But the state cannot be a permanent tenant.
Yes.
The state cannot sit there for eternity. That is the limited position. If it is the state's position that it has not been able to set the house in order, and if it's not been able to rectify corruption, that is because the state is fundamentally corrupt, and the state has actually worsened situations of corruption in most of these institutions, and it has degraded the entire temple ecosystem to the extent that idols and murtis and jewels are constantly stolen. The Madras High Court actually has come out with a judgment clearly showing that state officials, HRC officials along with state police officials were hand in glove with smugglers of idols and jewels. This is the status of the temple ecosystem under the government administration. I'm sorry, this position really needs no rebuttal because it's not rooted in fact. These are the facts, and these facts are publicly recorded. I think Mr. Hegde should read up his law on the subject better.
Okay, Deepak, some of the propositions that Mr. Hegde has made here.
The first point that Mr. Hegde doesn't highlight is that out of close to, let's say, 3 lakh temples in Tamil Nadu, less than 6,000 temples actually have Brahmin priests. So this constant bogey of Brahmin domination that he keeps touting over and over again is the Marxist trope that all of us have to suffer on a regular basis, which has absolutely no basis in facts. Because my Kuladevata, so to speak, is worshipped by a non-Brahmin priest, and I have to actually offer toddy and meat. So this is the diversity of this land, which unfortunately these Marxists and communists have absolutely no clue about in the first place. Point number 2, when the question of corruption is being addressed, when the question of secular administration is being addressed, what on earth is this particular point and what is its relevance with respect to this particular issue? Is it not possible for the state to legislate on this particular aspect and give the control of the institution back to the community?
Absolutely.
Are we basically saying that we can't? So this is an issue that he never addresses. Why do we have to suffer the state on a permanent basis?
And if there is an evil, it should stand remedied, and either the state takes a position on it and pushes through legislation or perhaps even a law, etc., to forbid any evil. I don't understand how that evil is going to be restored by submitting to its own authority the management of a temple. Clearly, we're not doing a good job if that particular process still or that evil still exists.
Just
Dr.
one
Ranganath.
more point, please. Just one more point.
Yeah, okay.
Just one more point.
Okay, one more point. Okay, one more point. Okay, Sai Deepak, yes.
Mr. Hegde should simply take a look at the composition of the trust under the TNHRC Act. It encompasses all castes, and those provisions have not been challenged in the court for the simple reason that nobody is basically saying that all caste representation should be forbidden under the law as far as the temple is concerned. That is the problem when people don't read either legislation or the petition.